Picture this: an empire that once stood toe to toe with the mighty pharaohs of Egypt, commanding vast armies and shaping the course of ancient history, only to vanish so completely that its very existence became a legend. For centuries, the Hittites were little more than a whisper in the dusty scrolls of antiquity, their name buried beneath the sands of time. Then, in the late 19th century, archaeologists stumbled upon something extraordinary: the ruins of a forgotten superpower, a civilization so advanced it had pioneered world-changing innovations, while most of Europe was still in the Bronze Age. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on one of history's most enigmatic empires, uncovering 20 astonishing facts that will rewrite everything you thought you knew about the ancient world. What made the Hittites so formidable? Imagine a nation that mastered the art of war so thoroughly that even Ramses the Great, Egypt's most celebrated warrior king, was forced to sign a peace treaty with them, the first documented in history. Or a culture that cracked the secret of iron smelting centuries before their rivals, giving them weapons and tools that seemed almost magical by comparison. Their capital, Hattusa, was a fortress city of towering walls and grand temples, a nerve center of diplomacy and trade that connected the Mediterranean with Mesopotamia. Yet, despite their brilliance, the Hittites vanished so abruptly that scholars still debate what doomed them. Was it invasion, famine, or something far more mysterious? This is a story of rise and fall, of innovation and oblivion, a tale that stretches from the battlefield of Cadish, where chariots clashed in one of history's largest Bronze Age battles, to the quiet ruins where modern archaeologists piece together clues like detectives solving an ancient cold case. Along the way, you'll discover how the Hittites influenced everything from law to religion, leaving fingerprints on civilizations that came long after them. So settle in, because we're about to journey deep into the heart of a forgotten empire, unearthing secrets that have waited over 3,000 years to be told. The Hittites may have disappeared from history, but their legacy is anything but lost. The Hittites didn't just build an empire, they rewrote the rules of ancient warfare. At the heart of their dominance was a weapon so advanced it left their enemies scrambling to catch up: the chariot. But these weren't the bulky, sluggish carts of other civilizations. The Hittites engineered theirs for speed and precision, crafting lightweight frames from flexible ash wood and reinforcing them with bronze fittings. Each chariot was a masterpiece of efficiency, carrying a 3-person crew that turned the battlefield into a deadly dance. Picture the driver steering through chaos, the shield-bearer deflecting arrows, and the archer picking off targets with terrifying accuracy. This wasn't just transportation, it was a mobile fortress on wheels. Their genius didn't stop there. At the legendary Battle of Cadish, the Hittites pulled off one of history's greatest military deceptions. While Pharaoh Ramses II boasted of his impending victory, the Hittite king Muwatalli II orchestrated a trap. He let false deserters feed the Egyptians misleading intel, then unleashed a surprise attack with thousands of chariots, nearly crushing Ramses' forces in a single stroke. It was psychological warfare at its finest, proof that the Hittites understood the mind of their enemy as well as the mechanics of battle. But what truly set them apart was how they used this advantage. Unlike empires that relied on sheer numbers, the Hittites built their dominance on strategic outposts and clever alliances. They controlled key mountain passes and trade routes, turning geography into a weapon. A single chariot unit could respond to threats faster than an entire infantry division, allowing them to project power across a vast empire stretching from the Aegean to the Euphrates. Even their enemies had to admit their brilliance. Egypt's eventual peace treaty with the Hittites wasn't just an admission of defeat. It was recognition of a rival that had mastered the art of war in ways no one else could match. And here's the twist. Archaeologists believe their chariots may hold clues to their mysterious collapse. The same technology that made them invincible required vast resources: timber, horses, skilled craftsmen. As droughts strained their economy and rebellions fractured their alliances, maintaining that edge may have become impossible. The Hittites didn't just fade away. Their greatest strength might have hidden the seeds of their downfall. Long before modern diplomats sat at negotiating tables, the Hittites and Egyptians set a precedent that would echo through millennia. The Treaty of Kaddish wasn't just a ceasefire, it was a masterpiece of political ingenuity, etched not on fragile parchment but on indestructible silver and clay tablets. Imagine the scene: two superpowers, exhausted by decades of chariot battles and border skirmishes, finally acknowledging that neither could crush the other. Instead of continuing the bloodshed, they crafted a document so forward-thinking it included clauses modern peace accords still emulate. Mutual defense pacts, the humane return of refugees, even appeals to divine witnesses. Every detail was meticulously negotiated, transforming sworn enemies into strategic allies. What makes this treaty extraordinary isn't just its content, but its survival. Archaeologists found identical copies buried in the archives of both Hattusa and Thebes, a deliberate act of record-keeping that reveals how seriously both empires took this agreement. The Hittite version, written in Babylonian cuneiform, the diplomatic language of the age, shows their sophistication as global players. Meanwhile, the Egyptian copy boasts hieroglyphs glorifying Ramses the Great, a reminder that even in peace, propaganda played its part. But beyond the grand posturing, the treaty tackled practicalities with surprising nuance. One clause ensured displaced civilians could return home safely, while another bound both nations to defend each other if attacked by third parties. This wasn't just peace, it was the birth of international law. Centuries later, the treaty's legacy would inspire an unexpected homage. When the United Nations sought a symbol for humanity's oldest diplomatic achievement, they chose a replica of this very document, now displayed in New York as a testament to the Hittites' visionary statecraft. Yet the real marvel lies in how they achieved it. Unlike later empires that imposed treaties through sheer dominance, the Hittites negotiated as equals with Egypt, a rare moment in antiquity where neither side claimed outright victory. Their success hinged on something radical for the time, recognizing that lasting stability required compromise, not conquest. Behind the lofty language, though, the treaty reveals a deeper truth about the Hittite mindset. While they were unmatched warriors, their greatest strength might have been their pragmatism. Facing internal strife and external threats, they understood that sometimes the bravest act wasn't drawing a sword but extending a hand. The Treaty of Kaddish didn't just end a war, it proved that even in an age of bronze and bloodshed, diplomacy could be mightier than the blade. Perched like an eagle's nest atop the rugged Anatolian plateau, Hattusa wasn't just a capital, it was a defiant statement carved in stone. Imagine a city so meticulously planned that its walls, snaking over 6 kilometers, followed the natural contours of the landscape, turning cliffs into fortifications and ridges into watchtowers. But these weren't ordinary barriers. The Hittites engineered their defenses with almost paranoid ingenuity. Hidden tunnels allowed troops to move unseen, while secret gates, camouflaged within the masonry, could unleash surprise counterattacks on besiegers. This wasn't just a fortress, it was a labyrinth designed to outthink any invader. Step inside those walls, and you'd find a metropolis buzzing with innovations that rivaled modern urban planning. Beneath the streets lay a network of clay pipes channeling rainwater away from buildings, a drainage system so effective it kept the city functional even during torrential storms. Granaries the size of small palaces stored enough grain to feed thousands, cushioning the empire against droughts or sieges. And at the heart of it all stood the royal library, a treasure trove of over 30,000 clay tablets. These weren't just administrative records, they were blueprints for empire building, containing everything from diplomatic correspondence to instructions for training chariot horses. The Hittites didn't just document history, they archived their genius, yet nothing captures Hattusa's spirit like the Lion Gate. Two massive stone beasts, their jaws frozen in eternal snarls, flanked the entrance, serving as both guardians and psychological warfare. To approaching enemies, they symbolized the Hittites' unbreakable will. To citizens, they were protectors warding off chaos. But there's a fascinating twist: those lions weren't just art. Recent studies suggest their positioning followed celestial alignments, turning the gate into a solar calendar that marked solstices. Even their architecture served dual purposes, intimidating outsiders while harmonizing with the cosmos. What truly set Hattusa apart, though, was its adaptability. When a devastating fire razed parts of the city around 1200 BCE, the Hittites didn't just rebuild, they reimagined. Streets were widened, temples reinforced with earthquake-resistant techniques, and new underground silos safeguarded food supplies. This constant evolution hints at why their empire endured for centuries. Hattusa wasn't merely a stronghold, it was a living organism, always learning, always refining. And when the end finally came, it wasn't faulty engineering that doomed the city. The walls stood firm until the people behind them simply vanished, leaving behind a puzzle wrapped in stone and silence. While their neighbors still relied on bronze, the Hittites were forging the future from fire and iron. Deep in the mountains of Anatolia, their blacksmiths discovered something revolutionary. By adding carbon during the smelting process and hammering the metal while it was still hot, they could produce iron tools and weapons far superior to anything the Bronze Age had ever seen. This wasn't just incremental progress, it was a technological leap that reshaped warfare. Picture a Hittite soldier facing an enemy with a bronze sword while bronze blades bent and dulled in combat. Iron weapons held their edge, slicing through armor with terrifying efficiency. But the real genius wasn't just in the crafting, it was in the control. The Hittites treated ironworking like a state secret, restricting knowledge to a select few guilds and closely monitoring production. Ancient texts hint at something extraordinary: kings personally overseeing shipments of iron ingots, treating them as strategic assets rather than ordinary trade goods. One Assyrian merchant's letter even complains about Hittite border guards confiscating iron, as if it were gold, revealing just how fiercely they protected their advantage. Some historians believe they deliberately spread myths about iron being a gift from the gods to mystify rivals, turning metallurgy into psychological warfare. The fallout from this monopoly was world-changing. When the Hittite Empire collapsed around 1200 BCE, their closely guarded techniques began leaking outward. Displaced smiths carried their knowledge across borders, triggering a domino effect that would define the next era of human history, the Iron Age. Suddenly, weapons and tools once reserved for elites became accessible, democratizing power in ways that toppled old hierarchies. Mediterranean civilizations that had struggled against Hittite might now wield that same technology, reshaping economies and battlefields from Greece to Mesopotamia. Yet for all its impact, the Hittites' iron had a paradoxical weakness. Their smelting required vast quantities of charcoal, leading to deforestation that may have accelerated their empire's environmental decline. The very innovation that made them invincible might have also planted the seeds of their downfall, a reminder that even the greatest advancements come with hidden costs. Their legacy, though, is undeniable. Every plowshare that turned soil, every sword that clashed in later centuries, owed something to those Anatolian forges where the Hittites first tamed iron's fiery potential. Buried beneath layers of clay and time, the Hittite language was a riddle waiting 3,000 years to be solved. When archaeologists first unearthed tablets covered in wedge-shaped symbols, they assumed it was just another variant of Babylonian cuneiform. But as they painstakingly pieced together the script, something extraordinary emerged, not just administrative records, but poetry, legal codes, and even instructions for training horses, all composed in the oldest known Indo-European tongue. This wasn't merely a lost language, it was a linguistic bridge connecting modern civilizations to their ancient roots. The breakthrough came in 1915 when a Czech scholar named Bedřich Hrozný noticed something astonishing. Amidst the unfamiliar symbols were words like water, uncannily similar to the English water, and quis, echoing the Latin quis, meaning who. Suddenly, the dots connected. Hittite wasn't some isolated anomaly. It was a distant cousin of Greek, Sanskrit, and even Germanic languages, proving that a shared linguistic ancestry stretched from the banks of the Tiber to the mountains of Anatolia. Imagine the shockwaves this sent through academia. Here was concrete evidence that a vast cultural network had existed millennia before historians ever suspected. But the Hittites didn't just inherit their writing system, they reinvented it. Borrowing cuneiform from Mesopotamian neighbors, they twisted it to fit their own tongue with remarkable flexibility. Where Babylonian script struggled with Hittite sounds, scribes improvised, creating new symbols or repurposing old ones. The result, a hybrid system so efficient it could record everything from royal decrees to intimate prayers to the storm god Teshub. One tablet even preserves a bilingual treaty, with Hittite on one side and Akkadian on the other, an ancient Rosetta Stone showcasing their diplomatic savvy. What truly astonishes, though, is how their language reveals the empire's soul. Unlike the grandiose monuments of Egypt, Hittite tablets expose the messy humanity behind the throne. There are petty lawsuits over stolen sheep, anxious letters about missing shipments of iron, even a king's plea to his angry stepmother. "Why do you treat me like a stranger?" This was a culture that documented not just conquests, but the whispers of everyday life. And then there's the irony. For all their innovations, the Hittites themselves may have forgotten their script's origins. Later tablets show scribes mistakenly reversing symbols or misplacing wedges, suggesting even they sometimes struggled with their borrowed writing system. It's a poignant reminder, no empire, no matter how brilliant, is immune to the slow erosion of time. Yet in those clumsy strokes, we find something profoundly relatable, the universal struggle to preserve meaning before it slips away. High above the Hittite world, where storm clouds gathered over Anatolia's rugged peaks, the people believed divinity spoke in thunder. Tarhunt, their storm god, wasn't just a distant figure of worship, he was a visceral force, his voice rumbling through the mountains as he rode his chariot across the sky, hurling lightning like javelins. Yet this wasn't a religion of fear, it was a covenant. Farmers tracked his tempests to predict rains for their crops, while kings invoked his name before battle, trusting he'd strike their enemies with the same fury he unleashed upon the land. And beside him stood Araniti, the sun goddess whose golden disk symbolized not just light, but unshakable justice. Her presence in courtrooms was so tangible that legal oaths were sworn in her name, blending celestial power with earthly law in a way few ancient cultures dared. What made their faith truly revolutionary, though, was its elasticity. When the Hittites conquered new territories, they didn't erase local gods, they invited them to the pantheon. A captured Syrian storm god might be reinterpreted as Tarhunt's regional avatar, while a Hurrian fertility goddess could join Araniti's celestial court. This wasn't mere tolerance, it was theological diplomacy, a way to bind diverse peoples to the empire without crushing their identities. One surviving treaty even lists over 60 deities from both sides as witnesses, turning a political agreement into a sacred compact. Imagine the message, our gods are watching and they've agreed to this too. Rituals brought this cosmic order down to earth. At the spring festival of Purily, priests reenacted Tarhunt's mythic victory over a serpentine chaos monster, symbolizing the empire's perpetual struggle against disorder. Oracle priests decoded divine will by studying animal livers or interpreting the flight of birds, an ancient form of intelligence gathering where celestial signs shaped military campaigns. And in Hattusa's great temple, the clatter of bronze cymbals and the scent of roasting meat filled the air as offerings bridged the human and divine realms. But here's the twist. Archaeologists found prayers where kings admitted their own ignorance, openly asking gods for clarity in decision-making. Unlike rulers who claimed absolute divine favor, Hittite leaders acknowledged their limitations, blending piety with pragmatism. This humility might explain their empire's endurance. By making room for other beliefs, they turned potential rebellions into collaborations, proving that spiritual flexibility could be as powerful as any army. Their gods didn't just rule the heavens, they helped build an empire where many cultures could kneel under the same storm. In a world where ancient justice often meant eye for an eye brutality, the Hittites crafted a legal code that would feel remarkably fair even by modern standards. Their laws, meticulously inscribed on clay tablets, operated on a radical principle. Harm done to society required repair, not just retribution. Take theft, for instance. While other contemporary empires might amputate a thief's hand, Hittite judges imposed fines scaled to the value stolen. A man who pocketed a neighbor's sheep didn't face mutilation. He paid back 12 sheep, a penalty designed to restore balance rather than incite cycles of vengeance. But the real shocker, women enjoyed protections unheard of in most ancient societies. A Hittite wife could walk away from a bad marriage, taking her dowry with her, an unthinkable concept in neighboring Babylon, where divorce was largely a husband's privilege. Survival records show women initiating legal disputes, inheriting family estates, and even running businesses without male guardians. One tablet recounts how a widow named Zintuleta-1E2bi successfully sued her brother-in-law for withholding her late husband's land, with judges ruling in her favor based on documented property rights. The brilliance of their system lay in its nuance. Laws adjusted for intent accidental harm incurred lighter penalties than premeditated acts. A builder whose shoddy construction caused a death-faced execution, but only if negligence could be proven. Otherwise, he paid compensation, acknowledging that mistakes happen. Even slavery wasn't the life sentence seen elsewhere. Hittite law allowed bondsmen to buy their freedom through work credits, a system closer to indentured servitude than chattel slavery. Perhaps most telling is what their laws omitted. While Hammurabi's code famously prescribed death for dozens of offenses, Hittite scribes rarely invoked capital punishment. The worst crimes, treason, sorcery, or defying royal decrees, might end in execution, but these were exceptions, not the rule. Instead, their tablets overflow with practical resolutions: how to split harvests between disputing farmers, what to do when a borrowed ox died in harness, even protocols for resolving tavern brawls. This legal philosophy didn't emerge in a vacuum. As an empire straddling trade routes between Mesopotamia and the Aegean, the Hittites absorbed diverse traditions, distilling them into something uniquely balanced. Their courts blended local customs with centralized authority, allowing conquered cities to retain their own judges under imperial oversight. The result: a system flexible enough to govern everything from cosmopolitan Hattusa to remote mountain villages, proof that even in the Bronze Age, lasting power came not just from swords, but from fairness etched in clay. The Hittite Empire's disappearance wasn't just a fade out, it was a plunge into darkness, one of history's most baffling vanishing acts. Around 1200 BCE, at the height of their power, the entire civilization unraveled like a thread pulled from a tapestry. Their mighty capital, Hattusa, once a beacon of diplomacy and innovation, was torched so thoroughly that archaeologists still find layers of ash in its streets. But here's the twist: this wasn't the work of a single enemy. The Hittites fell victim to a perfect storm of disasters that swept across the Mediterranean, leaving scholars to debate which blow struck the fatal hit. Some point to the shadowy sea peoples, marauders whose name appears in frantic Egyptian inscriptions as they ravaged coastal cities. Could these seafaring raiders have marched inland to sack Hattusa? Broken weapons and hastily built barricades suggest the capital fought desperately, but no records confirm the attackers' identities. Others argue internal revolts tore the empire apart. Tablets from the final years mention rebel vassals and grain shortages, hinting at a realm buckling under its own weight. Then there's the climate theory. Tree rings from the era reveal a terrifying drought, one so severe it turned fertile Anatolia into a dust bowl for nearly a century. Imagine a capital like Hattusa, its granaries emptied, its water channels dry, its people starving as the land itself turned against them. Yet even in collapse, the Hittites defied oblivion. While the heartland crumbled, fragments of their culture survived in places like Carchemish and Aleppo, where so-called Neo-Hittite kingdoms kept their traditions alive for another 500 years. These weren't pale imitations, they were vibrant city-states where Hittite gods still received offerings, where scribes continued writing in Luwian hieroglyphs, and where rulers boasted kinship to the old imperial line. A relief from Carchemish even shows a king wearing the same conical hat seen on Hittite monuments centuries earlier, a deliberate echo of lost glory. The real mystery isn't just how the Hittites fell, but why they couldn't rise again. Unlike Egypt or Assyria, which recovered from Bronze Age chaos, their empire vanished for good. Perhaps their centralized system relied too heavily on Hattusa's bureaucracy, leaving provinces helpless when the capital burned. Or maybe their greatest strength, iron, became their undoing, as rival nations mastered the technology and turned it against them. Whatever the truth, their legacy lingers in the unlikeliest places. When modern Turks brew tea in samovars or Armenians bake flatbreads, they're touching traditions that stretch back to Hittite hearths. The empire died, but its fingerprints never faded. The Hittites didn't just sign treaties, they mastered the delicate dance of diplomacy with a finesse that would impress modern statesmen. While the Treaty of Kaddish with Egypt gets the spotlight, their royal archives reveal something even more astonishing: a sprawling web of alliances woven through thousands of letters, gifts, and strategic marriages. Picture the royal scribes of Hattusa drafting correspondence to Babylon, Assyria, and even distant Mycenaean Greece, each message carefully calibrated to flatter, negotiate, or warn. What's extraordinary is how they addressed fellow rulers not as subjects or vassals, but as equals. A letter to Pharaoh Amenhotep III begins with, "To my brother, the king of Egypt," a term loaded with meaning. In the Hittite worldview, calling another ruler brother wasn't empty courtesy. It signaled recognition of mutual power, a subtle way to maintain balance in a volatile world. Their diplomatic playbook was surprisingly modern. When tensions flared with Mitanni, a rival kingdom in northern Syria, the Hittites didn't immediately reach for their swords. Instead, they proposed a royal marriage, sending King Shapululima's daughter to wed the Mitanni king. This wasn't just political theater. The bride traveled with a retinue of Hittite advisors who effectively became a listening post at the heart of a former enemy's court. Elsewhere, they leveraged trade as soft power, gifting Anatolian silver and lapis lazuli to secure favorable terms. One tablet even details how they resolved a border dispute with a minor kingdom by offering exclusive mining rights rather than threats, proving they understood that honey often worked better than vinegar. But their crowning achievement was the international summit they hosted after a devastating plague swept the Near East. Kings from across the region gathered in Hattusa not to argue over territory, but to coordinate a public health response, an ancient equivalent of a global crisis meeting. Delegates shared medical knowledge, established quarantine protocols, and even agreed to temporarily halt military campaigns to prevent the disease's spread. This wasn't just pragmatism, it was visionary statecraft recognizing that some threats transcended borders, yet beneath the polished surface lay razor-sharp strategy. The Hittites kept meticulous dossiers on every ruler's weaknesses, whether an Egyptian pharaoh's obsession with Nubian gold or an Assyrian king's paranoia about his siblings. Their spies, often disguised as merchants, reported everything from harvest yields to palace gossip, giving Hattusa an unparalleled intelligence edge. When Queen Pujuhepa corresponded with Ramses' Roman II wife Nefertari, her letters mixed warm greetings with subtle reminders of Hittite military might, blending charm and steel in equal measure. The true measure of their diplomatic genius, though, lies in what didn't happen. For nearly 5 centuries, no coalition of enemies managed to unite against them, a testament to how skillfully they played rivals against each other. Even as their empire faded, their methods endured. The Aramaic diplomats of later empires would adopt their brother terminology, while the very concept of negotiated peace over unconditional surrender became their unintended gift to history. The Hittites proved that in a world of bronze and blood, the sharpest weapon wasn't always a sword. Sometimes it was a well-worded letter sealed with the right royal title. In the Hittite world, the crown wasn't just a symbol of power, it was a sacred burden, a fusion of battlefield command and divine duty that few cultures ever attempted. When a Hittite king marched to war, he didn't merely oversee battles from a distant tent. He stood in the front lines, his chariot emblazoned with symbols of the storm god Tahant, believing victory hinged as much on divine favor as military strategy. But the moment he returned to Hattusa, his role shifted dramatically. Shedding his armor, he'd ascend the steps of the great temple, donning the robes of a high priest to perform rituals that ensured the gods' continued blessing. This wasn't just multitasking, it was a carefully choreographed dance between the earthly and the celestial, designed to convince his people that their ruler was the literal bridge between heaven and earth. The coronation ceremony revealed just how deeply this duality ran. New kings underwent an elaborate initiation called the Festival of Enthronement, where they drank from a sacred cup symbolizing communion with the gods, then reenacted mythical battles to prove their warrior mettle. One surviving text describes how the king's garments were ritually sewn with threads dipped in precious oils, each stitch accompanied by incantations meant to weave divine protection into his very being. But the most striking detail, the king wasn't considered fully legitimate until he successfully led his first military campaign, a stark reminder that spiritual authority alone wasn't enough. He had to earn his crown with steel and blood, yet for all their battlefield prowess, Hittite rulers trembled before one enemy no army could defeat: death itself. When a king died, the empire didn't just mourn, it enacted an intricate symphony of grief designed to appease the gods and stabilize the realm. For 14 days, mourners wailed in synchronized lamentations while priests burned offerings of honey, wine, and rare spices to guide the royal soul to the underworld. The king's horses, chariots, and even his favorite cup were buried with him, not as grave goods but as provisions for his journey. But here's what's fascinating. During this liminal period, the throne wasn't empty. A substitute king, usually a prisoner or condemned man, temporarily wore the crown, absorbing any cosmic chaos that might threaten the transition. After the true heir was safely installed, this sacrificial figure was quietly executed, his death symbolizing the end of one era and the unbroken continuity of the next. This priest-king duality reached its peak under Tudhaliya Roman IV, who carved his most audacious act of devotion into living rock. At the sanctuary of Yazilikaya, just outside Hattusa, he commissioned a monumental open-air gallery where deities stood twice life-size, their images chiseled into towering limestone cliffs. At the center of this divine assembly, the king himself, depicted shoulder to shoulder with Tahant, his hand raised in identical blessing. It was a visual manifesto. The ruler wasn't just the gods' representative on earth, he was their partner in maintaining cosmic order. But this sacred warrior balance wasn't foolproof. When kings failed militarily, their spiritual legitimacy crumbled too. After the disastrous loss of a key Syrian fortress, King Mursili Roman II didn't just blame his generals. He composed a startlingly personal prayer confessing his failures to the gods. "Have I not honored you? Why then have you abandoned me?" The reply, divined through liver omens, accused him of neglecting rituals. Even in defeat, the Hittites saw the divine hand at work, proving that their kings walked a razor's edge between triumph and catastrophe, where every earthly setback was also a theological crisis. What emerges from these fragments is a portrait of leadership more nuanced than simple theocracy or autocracy. The Hittite king wasn't just a warlord in priestly garb. He was the living embodiment of a philosophy that saw no separation between governing men and serving gods. His sword and his scepter were two halves of the same instrument, wielded to maintain harmony in a world where politics and faith were inextricably entwined. And when that balance held, the empire thrived. When it shattered, so too did their world. Buried beneath the ruins of Hattusa's royal palace lay a treasure more valuable than gold, the world's oldest known imperial filing system. The Hittites didn't just scribble occasional records, they archived their entire civilization on 30,000 clay tablets, turning wet earth into an indelible chronicle of law, war, and even royal dinner menus. What's astonishing isn't just the scale, but the sheer diversity of topics these baked mud documents preserved. One moment you're reading a tense diplomatic ultimatum to Egypt, the next you're scanning a scribe's complaint about his noisy neighbors keeping him awake. This wasn't mere record-keeping, it was an ancient Wikipedia capturing everything from the sublime to the absurd. Take the infamous Queen Pujuhepa vs. Stepson scandal. When Crown Prince Ahai-Teshub allegedly plotted against his stepmother, the resulting court case was documented with courtroom drama flair. The tablet describes how Pujuhepa, a former priestess who rose to become history's first extensively documented female diplomat, presented evidence of forged seals and intercepted letters. But here's the twist: rather than ordering execution, she negotiated his exile to a comfortable coastal estate. Even in betrayal, the Hittites preferred politics over bloodshed. Yet for every high-stakes drama, there are glimpses of everyday life that feel startlingly modern. A fragment titled, "How to Train a Chariot Horse," reads like an ancient instruction manual, specifying precise voice commands and warning against overfeeding before races. Another details a brewer's lawsuit over spoiled beer, complete with witness testimonies about foul odors. There are even what we'd now call self-help texts. One tablet advises young scribes to write daily, even when your hand tires, for skill hides in the clay. The real marvel is how they organized this chaos. Tablets were shelved by subject in dedicated library rooms, with catalog summaries etched on their edges. Important treaties were stored in fireproof clay envelopes, while urgent messages bore red painted warnings. Some bear the fingerprints of long-dead scribes pressed into the margins, turning these documents into tactile connections across millennia. Most remarkably, the archives reveal a culture obsessed with legacy. Kings ordered copies of treaties sent to distant temples, so future generations will know. When scribes made errors, they didn't erase, they annotated corrections, creating a paper trail of human fallibility. In these baked clay pages, the Hittites achieved what eluded most Bronze Age empires. They ensured their voices would never truly fall silent, leaving us not just facts, but the texture of their world, one carefully impressed wedge at a time. The Hittites didn't just borrow writing, they reinvented it twice, crafting a dual system as versatile as their empire itself. For official treaties and royal decrees, they adopted the wedge-shaped cuneiform of Mesopotamia, bending it to fit their own language with astonishing flexibility. But when it came to carving their legacy into stone, they switched scripts entirely, chiseling hieroglyphs so distinct from Egypt's that early archaeologists mistook them for mere decoration. These angular, almost runic symbols etched into temple walls and mountain cliffs became one of history's most stubborn puzzles, resisting decipherment for over a century after cuneiform had been cracked. What makes their hieroglyphs so fascinating isn't just their mystery, but their purpose. While cuneiform recorded the nuts and bolts of empire tax rolls, military dispatches, marriage contracts, the hieroglyphs broadcast power. Picture a traveler approaching a Hittite frontier city. Towering gates would greet them with monumental inscriptions proclaiming the king's victories in bold, pictorial symbols. A lion might represent strength, a mountain signify conquest, and a stylized god's head remind viewers of divine sanction. This wasn't just writing, it was propaganda carved in stone, designed to awe both literate elites and illiterate subjects alike. The real breakthrough came when linguists realized these hieroglyphs weren't just logograms like Egyptian counterparts. They functioned partly as syllables, allowing scribes to spell out names and places phonetically. Take the word Tarkasnawa, a vassal king's name. It appears as a sequence of symbols representing Tar plus Ka plus Sna plus Wa, a revelation that finally unlocked the script in the 1940s. But the Hittites added a clever twist. Their hieroglyphs could also shift roles, acting as determinatives to categorize words. A deity's name might be preceded by a tiny god symbol, while cities were marked with a fortress icon, creating a reading system as nuanced as modern emoji. Behind this duality lay a cultural balancing act. By maintaining two scripts, the Hittites navigated between global and local identities. Cuneiform connected them to the international stage, enabling diplomacy with Babylon and Egypt. Hieroglyphs, meanwhile, anchored them to Anatolia's native Luwian-speaking populations, a visual reminder that the empire honored its roots even as it expanded. This linguistic dexterity might explain why their influence endured long after their fall. When Neo-Hittite kingdoms like Carchemish rose centuries later, they abandoned cuneiform entirely, but kept those hieroglyphs alive, chiseling them into monuments until the Assyrian conquests erased them for good. Perhaps the most poignant testament to their writing's resilience lies in an unlikely place: modern crossword puzzles. The Hittite hieroglyph for water, a wavy line within a rectangle, is nearly identical to the symbol used today for swimming pool on international signage. It's a ghostly echo of an empire that refused to be forgotten, its voice still whispering through the symbols it left behind. While kings ruled with divine authority in most ancient empires, the Hittites built a surprising safety valve into their government, the Panku, a council of nobles that could challenge royal decisions and even remove a king deemed unjust or incompetent. Imagine the scene when King Telepinu faced rebellion after his predecessor's bloody purges. He didn't double down on tyranny. Instead, he codified the Panku's powers into law around 1500 BCE, decreeing that no royal execution could occur without the council's approval. This wasn't just damage control, it was a revolutionary check on absolute power in an era when monarchs answered only to the gods. The Panku functioned as part advisory board, part supreme court. Composed of military commanders, high priests, and regional governors, its members debated everything from tax policies to treason trials. Tablets from Hattusa reveal how they operated. Scribes recorded dissenting opinions alongside majority decisions, showing genuine deliberation rather than rubber stamp approval. One gripping account describes the Panku investigating a general accused of abandoning his post not on the king's orders, but because soldiers petitioned the council directly. Witnesses were called, battle plans scrutinized, and ultimately, the commander was either exonerated or demoted based on evidence. What set this system apart was its blend of pragmatism and principle. While the king retained final authority, the Panku ensured his decisions had buy-in from the empire's power brokers. When selecting a new ruler, they didn't automatically crown the eldest son. They evaluated candidates' military prowess and administrative skill, sometimes bypassing weak heirs to preserve stability. This meritocratic streak explains how the Hittites avoided the fratricidal wars that plagued other dynasties. Even more remarkably, the Panku occasionally mediated between rival claimants, as when Queen Pujuhepa helped negotiate a power-sharing arrangement between her stepsons to prevent civil war. But don't mistake this for Athenian-style democracy. The Panku represented elite interests, not common citizens, and its influence waxed and waned with each king's personality. Strong rulers like Sapaluliyama sometimes sidelined it, while weaker monarchs leaned on its legitimacy. Yet its very existence reveals a sophisticated political philosophy. The Hittites understood that enduring power required consent, not just coercion, a lesson many modern governments still grapple with today. Their clay tablets preserve council debates where nobles openly questioned kings, proving that even in the Bronze Age, the voice of collective wisdom could temper the whims of the throne. The system's genius lay in its flexibility. Unlike rigid bureaucracies that crumbled under pressure, the Panku adapted to crises. During famines, it coordinated grain distribution across provinces. When plague struck, it enforced quarantine measures, and when the empire finally collapsed, fragments of this tradition survived in Anatolian city-states where councils of elders continued governing for centuries. The Hittites may not have invented democracy, but they perfected something just as vital: the art of balancing authority with accountability, ensuring their empire thrived not through fear alone, but through shared stake in its survival. The Hittites didn't carve art, they chiseled ideology into stone. Their reliefs, with their stark geometric lines and exaggerated features, weren't meant to mimic reality, but to project an unshakable vision of cosmic and earthly order. At Yazilikaya, the empire's most sacred open-air sanctuary, the rock walls come alive with a silent parade of deities: the storm god Tarhunt with his lightning bolts, the sun goddess Araniti radiating authority, and a host of lesser gods frozen mid-stride, as if the cliff itself had parted to reveal the divine court. What's striking isn't just the scale. Some figures tower over 2 meters tall, but the deliberate composition. The gods aren't scattered randomly. They march in carefully arranged groups, mirroring the Hittite belief in a universe balanced between opposing forces. Storm deities face earth goddesses, sky gods align with underworld spirits, creating a visual harmony that reinforced their theology of equilibrium. This wasn't art for art's sake. Every chisel stroke served a purpose. When King Tudhaliya IV commissioned Yazilikai's Grand Gallery around 1200 BCE, he wasn't just honoring the gods, he was embedding his own image among them. In one pivotal relief, he stands shoulder to shoulder with Tarhunt, their poses identical, their hands raised in mirrored blessings. The message was unmistakable. The king wasn't just a ruler, he was the god's chosen partner in maintaining cosmic order. For illiterate subjects, these carvings functioned like a colossal political billboard, broadcasting the monarchy's divine right in a language anyone could understand. But Hittite artistry had a subtler dimension too. Look closely at the famed lion gate of Hattusa, and you'll notice something extraordinary. The beast's proportions are deliberately distorted. Their massive heads and exaggerated claws loom larger when viewed from below, exploiting perspective to heighten their intimidating effect on approaching visitors. This psychological savvy extended to smaller works as well. Ivory carvings found in royal tombs show a startling attention to texture, the ripple of muscles beneath a bull's hide, the delicate folds of a goddess's robe. Even their pottery carried coded meanings. A seemingly simple drinking cup might bear spiral patterns symbolizing eternity, or a deer motif invoking a specific deity's protection. The real masterstroke of Hittite art, though, was its adaptability. Conquered cities weren't forced to adopt a rigid imperial style. Local artisans incorporated Hittite symbols into traditional designs, creating hybrid works that honored regional tastes while affirming loyalty to the crown. A Syrian vase might feature Tarhunt alongside local storm gods, or a Hurrian temple relief blend Hittite hieroglyphs with native imagery. This cultural flexibility turned art into a tool of soft power, binding diverse peoples to the empire without erasing their identities. Yet for all its grandeur, Hittite art harbored an intimate side too. Personal seals worn by everyone from kings to merchants often depicted private devotions, a family's patron deity, a favorite protective charm. These tiny carvings, pressed into clay tablets or wax, reveal a people who saw the divine not just in monumental cliffs, but in the daily act of marking a contract or sealing a letter. It's this duality that makes their legacy endure, an empire that could chisel its gods into mountainsides, yet still leave room for the whisper of personal faith in the palm of a hand. Nestled at the crossroads of continents, the Hittites didn't just occupy land, they commanded the ancient world's most lucrative economic highways. Picture a caravan of donkeys winding through the Taurus Mountains, their backs laden with silver from Anatolia's mines and lapis lazuli from distant Afghanistan. Every step of that journey funneled wealth into Hittite coffers, thanks to a network of toll stations and fortified trading posts that turned geography into gold. Their secret wasn't just controlling the routes between Mesopotamia and the Aegean. It was transforming them into a regulated system where safety came at a price, and everyone, from Assyrian merchants to Mycenaean adventurers, was willing to pay. The real genius lay in what they taxed. While other empires focused on bulky staples like grain or timber, the Hittites targeted high-value luxuries, tin for bronze production, purple-dyed textiles from Syria, even exotic elephant ivory from Egypt. These weren't mere commodities, they were status symbols fueling the elite economies of neighboring civilizations. A single tablet from Hattusa details how a shipment of 20 tin ingots enough to alloy with copper for 300 bronze swords passed through 5 different checkpoints, each taking a cut. The math was ruthless. By controlling the sole land bridge between east and west, the Hittites effectively held a monopoly on Bronze Age globalization. But their mastery went beyond brute force taxation. Archaeologists have uncovered way stations along these routes where Hittite officials didn't just collect duties, they provided services. Stables with fresh horses, repair workshops for damaged wagon wheels, even translators fluent in a dozen languages. It was the ancient equivalent of a modern free trade zone, designed to keep commerce flowing smoothly. One particularly vivid letter from a merchant named Ashur-nadar describes how Hittite guards escorted his caravan through bandit-prone mountain passes, their presence alone deterring attacks. This wasn't extortion, it was value-added protection that made the steep tolls worth paying. The ripple effects of this system were staggering. When Hittite engineers improved roads to accommodate heavier wagons, Assyrian textile exports to Crete surged. When they cracked down on piracy along the Cilician coast, the price of Cypriot copper in Babylon dropped by nearly half. Even their enemies benefited. Egypt's pharaohs relied on Hittite-controlled routes to import Lebanese cedar for their temples, grumbling about the tariffs but powerless to bypass them. Yet this economic web had a vulnerability the Hittites couldn't foresee. Their entire model depended on stability, on empires like Assyria and Egypt remaining wealthy enough to crave luxuries. When the Bronze Age collapse sent civilizations tumbling like dominoes around 1200 BCE, the caravan slowed to a trickle. No tin meant no bronze for weapons, no trade meant empty treasuries. The Hittites had built an empire on connecting others, and when those connections frayed, their middleman advantage evaporated overnight. The very routes that made them indispensable became ghost roads, littered with the abandoned goods of a world that no longer had buyers. In Hittite society, your clothing wasn't just fabric, it was a walking declaration of your place in the cosmic order. The elites strolled through Hattusa's streets in ankle-length robes edged with intricate fringe, each swaying tassel a silent proclamation of their rank. These weren't mere garments, they were engineered statements. Wool from prized flocks was dyed in rich purples and blues using techniques borrowed from Syrian artisans, while the conical hats perched atop their heads resembling inverted mountain peaks, mirrored the sacred peaks where gods dwelled. Even the way these hats tilted forward carried meaning. The greater the angle, the higher the wearer's status. But the true masterpiece of Hittite sartorial symbolism was the royal mantle. When a king presided over ceremonies, his shoulders bore a heavy, embroidered cloak depicting celestial patterns, zigzags for lightning, stars for divine favor, and stylized mountains representing his earthly domain. This wasn't just decoration, it was a wearable map of the universe, declaring the monarch's role as the linchpin between heaven and earth. Surviving sculptures show how these mantles were deliberately oversized, forcing the wearer to move with measured dignity, his every gesture amplified by the weight of his office. For commoners, clothing told a starkly different story. Simple knee-length tunics of undyed linen or coarse wool marked their wearers as laborers, the fabric's roughness reflecting their daily toil. Yet even here, subtle details mattered. A shepherd might knot his belt to one side for practicality, while a potter's tunic often showed clay-stained hems, accidental badges of profession that the elite would never tolerate on their pristine garments. Footwear became one of the most telling status symbols. Nobles wore leather sandals laced to mid-calf, the soles sometimes reinforced with metal studs for both durability and audible prestige, each step clicking like a gentle reminder of their approach. Servants, by contrast, often went barefoot, their calloused feet a visible testament to their station. Excavations at Hattusa's palace quarters even revealed a curious detail. The floors near the throne room were meticulously smoothed, while servant passages remained uneven. The message was clear: elites walked without obstacle, while others navigated life's roughness firsthand. What's fascinating is how these fashion codes crossed cultural lines. When Hittite diplomats visited Egypt, they adapted their wardrobe just enough to show respect, adding gold thread to their fringes in homage to Pharaoh's tastes, while keeping their distinctive conical hats as a defiant nod to homeland traditions. Even in defeat, clothing remained political. Vassal rulers sworn to Hattusa were required to wear hybrid garments blending local styles with Hittite elements, a daily reminder of where true power lay. The attention to detail went beyond the living. Royal tombs contained miniature wardrobes, tiny linen shirts, and embroidered sashes meant to dress the deceased in the afterlife. One child's burial included leather shoes so finely stitched they still bear the imprint of little toes, a heartbreaking glimpse of how deeply these sartorial rules were ingrained. From palace to pasture, the Hittites wove their social order into every thread, turning cloth into a language everyone could read, but few were allowed to speak. When spring winds swept through Anatolia, the Hittites didn't just welcome warmer weather, they staged an epic cosmic drama where the fate of the world hung in the balance. The Purily Festival was no ordinary celebration. It was a meticulously choreographed spectacle where priests, warriors, and even the king himself played roles in reenacting the storm god Tahut's legendary triumph over Ilianka, the serpent of chaos. For 8 days, the boundaries between myth and reality blurred as entire cities transformed into theaters of the divine. At dawn on the first day, a hush would fall over Hattusa's temples as high priests donned masks representing deities, their voices dropping into ritual cadences to recite the creation story, not as distant lore, but as urgent incantation. Every word, every gesture was believed to actively renew the fragile pact between heaven and earth. The climax came with the sacred marriage rite, a symbolic union between Tahut and the sun goddess Araniti that mirrored real political alliances. A priestess channeling the goddess would be escorted to a lavishly decorated chamber where the king or his royal stand-in awaited. Their ritual coupling meant to fertilize the land as surely as spring rains. But this was no private ceremony. Crowds gathered outside, singing hymns and beating drums, their collective energy fueling what they believed was the actual rejuvenation of creation's forces. Meanwhile, young warriors staged mock battles in the streets, their wooden swords clattering against wicker shields in carefully rehearsed sequences that mirrored Tahut's struggle. To modern eyes, it might look like theater, but to the Hittites, these performances were as vital as planting crops. If a single ritual step faltered, they feared the cosmos might slip back into primordial disorder. Food played a surprisingly strategic role in the festivities. Communal feasts weren't just meals but acts of alchemy, where ordinary ingredients became sacred. Barley from last year's harvest was brewed into special festival beer, while lambs sacrificed at dawn roasted on spits alongside wild greens believed to carry Tahut's blessing. Every citizen, from noble to potter, received a portion, a tangible reminder that the god's favor flowed to all. Archaeologists have found ration lists detailing exactly how much honey-drenched bread each village quarter was allotted, proving these weren't spontaneous gatherings but state-managed acts of unity. What's fascinating is how Purily wove together threads from conquered cultures. The serpent-slaying myth bore striking resemblances to Babylonian tales of Marduk battling Tiamat, while the sacred marriage echoed Sumerian traditions. Yet the Hittites made these elements their own. blending them with Anatolian mountain rituals until something entirely new emerged. This cultural alchemy had a practical side. By incorporating local traditions from across their empire, the festival became a unifying force, binding far-flung provinces to Hattusa's spiritual orbit. The festival's legacy outlasted the empire itself. Centuries after Hattusa's fall, Roman historians wrote of Anatolian spring rites where villagers still chased a serpent effigy through fields, a ghostly echo of Purily's enduring power. Today, scholars see in these celebrations a masterclass in social engineering. Through drama, food, and shared spectacle, the Hittites turned abstract theology into visceral experience, reminding their people that order wasn't guaranteed. It was a collective achievement requiring yearly renewal. The true genius wasn't just in the rituals themselves, but in understanding that empires aren't held together by force alone, but by stories retold, feasts shared, and the stubborn belief that human actions could keep the dragons of chaos at bay. For the Hittites, the future wasn't just unpredictable, it was written in the entrails of a sacrificed lamb or the erratic flight of a startled bird. Before any significant decision, from launching a military campaign to selecting a new royal heir, priests would gather in smoke-filled chambers to perform elaborate divination rituals, slicing open animals with ritual precision to read the messages hidden within their organs. One surviving tablet records a battlefield commander halting his advance simply because a sheep's liver showed unusual spots, a celestial red light that overruled even the most carefully laid war plans. This wasn't superstition, it was a sophisticated system of interpreting divine will, where every irregularity in nature carried cosmic significance. The most trusted method involved hepatoscopy, the examination of sheep livers. Priests trained for decades to memorize the intricate map of the liver's lobes, each section corresponding to different gods or future events. A discoloration near the gallbladder might signal impending drought, while an enlarged vein could warn of betrayal. These weren't vague guesses. The Hittites compiled detailed manuals, some over 50 tablets long, cataloging thousands of possible omens with specific interpretations. One entry describes how a liver's right lobe appearing, like a clenched fist, mandated postponing trade negotiations, while another notes that a crescent-shaped mark near the portal vein required immediate purification rituals for the royal family. But the heavens offered clues too. Augurs tracked bird formations with the precision of astronomers mapping stars, believing that a hawk circling counter-clockwise revealed enemy movements, while vultures drifting eastward signaled abundant harvest. Even weather played its part. A thunderstorm during treaty negotiations was seen as Tarhunt's direct commentary, often forcing last-minute revisions to terms. The king himself participated in these rituals, donning a special diviner's robe to personally inspect ominous signs, blending his political authority with priestly intuition. What's fascinating is how this system accommodated doubt. Unlike rigid prophecies, Hittite divination allowed for contingency plans. If a first reading proved unfavorable, priests might repeat the ritual with a fresh animal or consult alternative methods like dream interpretation. A general facing bad omens before battle could delay by 3 days, then seek new signs. A pragmatic blend of faith and flexibility. Court records show advisors sometimes shopping for favorable omens, discreetly swapping sacrificial animals until the desired message emerged, proving that even in the divine, there was room for human ingenuity. The legacy of these practices lingers in unexpected ways. When archaeologists unearthed a Hittite outpost in modern Turkey, they found a room lined with clay models of livers, each inscribed with training notes, an ancient classroom where apprentice priests honed their craft. These artifacts reveal a civilization that sought order in chaos, convinced that the universe whispered its secrets to those who knew how to listen. In a world without science as we know it, the Hittites turned divination into both spiritual compass and strategic tool, proving that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't a sword, but the ability to read the signs. In the dim light of a Hittite healer's chamber, a patient might witness something extraordinary. A priest-physician chanting over a clay model of a diseased liver while simultaneously brewing a pungent tea of willow bark and myrrh. This wasn't just superstition, it was a sophisticated medical system where science and spirituality walked hand in hand. The Hittites saw illness as both physical and supernatural, a disruption of the body's balance and a sign of divine displeasure. Their medical texts, preserved on clay tablets, reveal a startling duality: precise instructions for setting broken bones alongside elaborate rituals to banish demon infestations believed to cause fever. One treatment for a stubborn wound involved packing it with honey and yarrow, a combination modern science now recognizes as antibacterial, while another required the patient to swallow a tiny silver amulet inscribed with spells against infection. What sets their approach apart is how seamlessly they merged observation with mysticism. A healer diagnosing jaundice would examine the patient's eyes and urine, just as a modern doctor might, but also scrutinize the liver of a sacrificed sheep for omens. Their pharmacopoeia was remarkably advanced. They used opium poppies for pain, licorice root for digestive issues, and even a primitive form of aspirin from willow leaves. Yet these remedies were never just chemical. Each came with incantations invoking the gods of healing. A prescription for childbirth complications might include ergot fungus to speed contractions, a precursor to modern labor-inducing drugs, while midwives whispered prayers to the mother goddess Hana. The most fascinating treatments involved sympathetic magic, where healers crafted wax or clay models of afflicted body parts, believing that manipulating the replica could influence the real organ. A surviving text describes molding a wax heart, piercing it with bronze needles to release evil, then melting it in fire as the patient recited purification vows. To the Hittites, this wasn't mere symbolism, it was a tangible way to realign cosmic and bodily harmony. Archaeologists have found these votive organs buried near temples, some still bearing fingerprints pressed into the clay by desperate hands. Mental health received equally nuanced attention. Depression and anxiety were attributed not to personal weakness but to soul theft by malicious spirits. Treatments blended herbal sedatives like valerian root with therapies startlingly modern in concept. Music therapy with lyres and drums, hydrotherapy in sacred springs. Even what we'd now call talk therapy, patients confessed fears to priests who absolved them of sins believed to attract dark forces. One tablet advises a melancholic nobleman to walk daily in sunlight while repeating affirmations of his worth, a Bronze Age precursor to cognitive behavioral techniques. Yet for all their innovation, Hittite medicine had a dark edge. Prognosis often hinged on divination. If a sacrificed bird's wings curled upward, recovery was assured. If downward, the healer might abandon treatment altogether. Legal texts reveal malpractice cases where physicians faced fines or exile for misdiagnosing omens rather than botching procedures. This tension between empiricism and faith reflects a society straddling two worlds, one where a splint could mend a bone, but only divine favor could ensure it healed straight. The ultimate testament to their system's effectiveness lies in its endurance. Centuries after the empire's fall, Roman chroniclers wrote of Anatolian mountain healers still using Hittite herbal blends, while Byzantine medical manuals preserved incantations nearly identical to those once recited in Hattusa's temples. Even today, when a doctor prescribes both antibiotics and bed rest, They echo the Hittite belief that healing requires treating not just the body, but the whole human experience, a legacy etched not in clay tablets alone, but in the very foundations of medicine itself. Walk through the streets of modern Ankara, and you'll find the Hittites staring back at you, not in crumbling ruins, but in the crisp images on Turkish lira banknotes. That iconic lion from the gates of Hattusa, once a symbol of imperial might, now graces the 20 lira bill, a daily reminder that this ancient civilization never truly vanished. Museums across Turkey proudly display Hittite artifacts, their angular hieroglyphs and stern-faced statues drawing lines of schoolchildren and scholars alike. But the connection runs deeper than symbolism. In rural villages near the old Hittite heartland, farmers still plow up fragments of pottery with designs eerily similar to those their ancestors crafted 3,000 years ago, while local legends whisper of giant kings who once ruled the land, a hazy memory of the empire's towering figures like Sepululima and Muwatalli. What's astonishing is how actively the Hittite story keeps evolving. Just 2 years ago, archaeologists near Alakahyuk unearthed a previously unknown temple complex with walls covered in bilingual inscriptions, Hittite cuneiform alongside Luwian hieroglyphs, offering fresh clues about how the empire managed its diverse subjects. Every digging season brings discoveries that force textbooks to be rewritten. A trader's archive revealing Anatolia's far-flung trade networks, a battlefield littered with arrowheads that reshapes our understanding of their military tactics, or a peasant's cottage preserved with its Hittite-style looms still standing, proving their influence trickled down to the humblest homes. Yet their legacy isn't confined to museums or dig sites. The Hittites quietly shaped the modern world in ways most people never realize. Their legal concept of proportional justice, where fines replaced brutal corporal punishment, echoes in today's civil court systems. The Indo-European language they spoke birthed linguistic branches that eventually grew into English, Greek, and Hindi. Even the humble roadside kebab owes a debt to Hittite cuisine. Clay tablets describe meat grilled on skewers with cumin and coriander, a recipe that likely traveled along their trade routes to influence later Ottoman cooking. Perhaps the most poignant survival is in Turkey's cultural DNA. When artisans in Cappadocia weave kilims with geometric patterns mirroring Hittite temple carvings, or when villagers perform folk dances mimicking ancient harvest rituals, they're unwittingly channeling a civilization that refuses to be erased. The past isn't dead here, it's layered like the strata of a tell, where a farmer's field might hide a Hittite granary beneath its soil, or a child's playground could sit atop a forgotten royal road. And so the Hittites endure, not as dusty relics but as quiet architects of the present. Their lions still roar from museum pedestals, their laws still whisper in courtrooms, and their stories still unfold with every archaeologist's trowel. Empires rise and fall, but true influence is measured not in years of dominance, but in how deeply a culture embeds itself in the world that comes after. The Hittites didn't just leave ruins, they left a blueprint. From chariot battles that rewrote the art of war to treaties that laid the foundation for modern diplomacy, the Hittites didn't just pass through history, they carved their name into its very bedrock. Their story is a testament to how civilizations can blaze brightly across centuries, only to vanish into the shadows, leaving behind clues that whisper their greatness. As we piece together their legacy from shattered tablets and silent ruins, we're reminded that history isn't just about the empires that endured, but also about those that fell, and the indelible marks they left behind. Think about the echoes of Hittite innovation in our world today. Their legal codes, with their emphasis on restitution over retribution, planted early seeds for justice systems that prioritize fairness. Their mastery of iron didn't just give them an edge in battle, It sparked a technological revolution that would redefine entire epochs. Even their diplomatic playbook, with its delicate balance of power and persuasion, feels strikingly contemporary. The Hittites may have crumbled under the weight of drought and upheaval, but their ideas outlasted their empire, seeping into the DNA of the civilizations that followed. Yet their disappearance remains one of antiquity's most tantalizing mysteries. Unlike Egypt or Rome, whose declines were gradual and well documented, the Hittites seemed to evaporate almost overnight. Was it climate change that starved their cities, invasion that shattered their defenses, or perhaps a slow unraveling of the very alliances that once made them invincible? The truth may lie buried in unexcavated mounds across Anatolia, waiting for the next generation of archaeologists to uncover. This is the thrill of history. Every answer leads to new questions. Every discovery cracks open another door. The Hittites challenge us to look beyond the familiar narratives, to search for the forgotten players who shaped our world in ways we're only beginning to grasp. Who knows what other empires lie hidden in plain sight, their stories tucked away in untranslated texts or beneath layers of undisturbed earth. As you reflect on these 20 glimpses into their world, consider this: history isn't just a record of what we remember, but also an invitation to explore what we've overlooked. If this journey into the heart of a forgotten superpower has sparked your curiosity, there are countless more chapters waiting to be unearthed. Hit subscribe to join us as we keep digging into the past, one civilization at a time. And drop a comment below: which Hittite revelation surprised you the most? Was it their revolutionary chariots, their ahead of the time laws, or the eerie abruptness of their downfall? The conversation doesn't end here. Until our next adventure through time, keep questioning, keep wondering, and never stop uncovering the stories that shape